I call this meeting of the Rotary Club of Oakland to order. I am Dudley Thompson and have the honor to serve as the president of the Rotary Club of Oakland. We were founded in 1908 and we're the third established Rotary Club of some 36,000 Rotary clubs in over 200 countries around the world. We are a diverse community of some 300 local business, professional, and community leaders who unite to improve our local community and international communities through a common commitment of service above self. For over 113 years, we have welcomed Rotarians and guests to our club meetings, and I welcome you to our 5,359th meeting. If you're a visiting Rotarian or a guest of a Rotarian, please enter your name in the chat box. It's located at the center or the bottom of the screen so that we can recognize you a little bit later. We also recommend that you view today's meeting using speaker view located in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. If you have comments or want to ask a question of our speaker today, please use the chat box. Robert Kidd, would you please introduce our speaker for the day? You're muted, Robert. Joan, you have to show him how to unmute. There you go.
An unusual, an unprecedented misstep on my part. Our speaker today is Gene Slater. He's joining us from his office at CSG Advisors in San Francisco. For more than 40 years, he has served as a senior advisor on housing issues to federal, state, and local agencies. He has just this month published a book entitled Freedom to Discriminate: How Realtors Conspired to Segregate Housing and Divide America. Available, I might add, through Amazon, Heyday Press, and your local bookstore. Freedom to Discriminate describes how the California real estate industry led successful efforts to bar non-Caucasian homebuyers from moving into what were deemed to be Caucasian residential neighborhoods. These are not events that took place in the distant past, but within some of our lifetimes. These are not events that took place in Alabama or Mississippi, but right here in California. Please welcome Gene Slater.
Thank you very much. So let me talk for a minute about how I came to write the book and my background, and then sort of some of the key findings and thinking about the Bay Area as a focus. So for the last 50 years, I've worked in affordable housing, in financing affordable housing, starting with looking at every abandoned building in the South Bronx in 1970, and then designing for Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a home improvement loan program that wound up fixing up 18,000 of the 72,000 single family homes, and then worked on like 40 of those programs around the country. And we got hired by San Francisco to do the same thing in the early 1980s. And after working for the city for a few months, we said, this is not your problem. Houses are going to get fixed up in San Francisco. The problem is going to be affordability. And so I've worked on all aspects of affordable housing in suburbs and inner cities, revitalizing public housing. We helped design in Oakland's neck of the woods, the Alameda County general obligation bond issue, Measure A, I think in 2019 for $580 million for affordable housing. So I have a long background. So, and part of what led me to write this book was realizing how little I or other people in this industry and work in affordable housing were constantly dealing with the after effects of segregation in inner cities and suburbs and affordability without really knowing how this came about. I mean, I took zoning and planning classes at Harvard and MIT. Nobody ever talked about the racial origins of those seemingly neutral approaches. But the particular stimulus to this book was taking a graduate rights seminar at Stanford some years ago, where the question occurred to me, how is it that on every issue of civil rights, conservatives argue that extending or preserving or maintaining civil rights would violate individual freedom, would violate American freedom? And when did this come from? And has that always been the case? Has that always been the argument? And as I researched that, I found that these two stories, the story of the history of segregation and the story of the birth of this conservative idea of freedom, were a single story. And they come out of the way that the organized real estate industry, the nation's realtors, members of local real estate boards, created and defended residential segregation in this country and created the divides that are at the heart of America today. Not only the geographic and physical and racial divides, but in many ways our political divides and our increasingly irreconcilable political polarization came out of justifications for segregation in the name of freedom. So that's sort of the big picture of what this story is about. So let me begin by talking about where this history really started. That segregation, residential segregation, unlike the myths that realtors later promulgated, was not something normal or natural or part of, always been true of American cities. Rather, it was an invention in the same way that the airplane was invented. It was designed by several individuals designing particular techniques that spread rapidly at about the same time as the airplane and the automobile and became the norm in America and were imposed by the power of real estate boards. Let me just explain who they were. So real estate boards were created in the early 1900s, like 1904, I think, in Berkeley, 1903 in Los Angeles, by the most established, very socially prominent brokers in each city at a time when there was no licensing, there was no rules, endless amounts of fraud, to sort of regulate the industry, to eliminate fraud, to create state licensing, and to dominate the industry by creating a multiple listing service that allowed them to control. There were only a small percentage of all the brokers at the time, but allowed them to control 80% of residential sales. And it was only because of the power of organizing the real estate industry that one could impose segregation in America's free and rambunctious economic free markets, that it took basically a cartel to do that. I'm not saying, and that was what made the difference in the creation of segregation. So if you go back to America's cities at the beginning of the 1900s, in California and across the country, neighborhoods were racially mixed. Blocks in Baltimore, Louisville, Washington, St. Louis, hundreds of blocks in each city were racially mixed. People lived by where they could afford, not by their ancestry. If they were poorer, they lived in poorer neighborhoods, but those were racially mixed as well. As a broker in Los Angeles, for example, said in 1904, the Negroes of this city have prudently refused to segregate themselves, but live in many of the best areas of the city. This was sort of the norm. And yet, within a dozen years, the same city, an African American said, "We've been surrounded by invisible walls. The whites have surrounded us and prevented us going beyond those walls." How did that happen? This story, in many ways, begins in the East Bay, because the first model for residential segregation, the model that has wound up dividing every city in America and continues in many ways informally today, was created in Berkeley, a mile and a half from the University of California campus. It was created by Duncan McDuffie, who was a member and president of the Berkeley Real Estate Board, who was designing a new kind of subdivision in Claremont, the area around the Claremont Hotel. And he wanted to create not the ordinary subdivisions with paper streets and cookie cutter lots, but he was an ardent environmentalist and later the national president of the Sierra Club, created the Save the Redwoods League, helped create the California park system, has a mountain in the Sierras named after him. McDuffie was his ardent environmentalist, wanted to create a high-end subdivision with topographically contoured streets and curving streets and beautiful trees and high-end homes. It would be and he later did St. Francis Wood in San Francisco in the same way. And to make that economically viable because of all the infrastructure costs, he imposed on buyers of those homes were covenants. This had just been started a few years before, and these were covenants, deed restrictions that basically said to each buyer limited what they could do with their property. Because McDuffie is building homes or lots that he's selling, and it's only when he sells the last lots 5 years from now or 7 years from now that he's going to recover his investments. So the usual covenants of the time were covenants on you have to build a house of a certain size, and it can't be an apartment house, and it can't have commercial uses, and it has to preserve the street trees, has to be set back from the street a certain distance. To this, he added one other covenant, which was that no one not of the Caucasian race could live in the property unless they were a servant. And he imposed this starting in 1905. Within the next year, another developer, J.C. Nichols in Kansas City, used the same approach. And it spread very quickly to high-end subdivisions in California, and then to middle-class subdivisions like Culver City in Los Angeles and working-class subdivisions. So within a few years, most of the new homes in the United States had these kinds of racial covenants. Realtors then, in places like Pasadena and Oakland and Berkeley, decided this was a marketing tool. It wasn't a plan to create segregation in America. This was a marketing tool for selling lots. And although buyers originally said, why should I have to sign a covenant, a deed restriction on property I'm owning? It sort of violates, my American right to own property, my freedom. And they said, no, it's not the restrictions on you which matter, it's the restrictions on your neighbors which count. They were selling fear. And at the time, you could also say, there were very few Japanese or African Americans in the Bay Area who were likely to buy the highest end lots up on the Berkeley Hills. So why was McDuffie doing this? He was doing this precisely to add social cachet, to basically say, as an assurance, your children, to people buying these high-end lots, they're always going to play outside with children like them. He called this planning for permanence. He wound up building homes for 100,000 Bay Area residents this way. And in the 1930s, Berkeley's mayor called his work, these things, a model for new neighborhoods across America. He got an honorary degree for Berkeley for what he did. So this was highly socially accepted. Okay, this was a way of organizing real estate. McDuffie and these other early realtors were progressives in the spirit of Teddy Roosevelt. They didn't believe in freedom at all. They believed in order, progress, stability, and they believed that stability depended on conformity. Not only conformity, racial conformity, and conformity in the form of zoning. So McDuffie, and his firm still exists, Mason McDuffie, you'll see it's, every time you go look at open houses. He was the head of Berkeley's planning board. He invented and created the first single family zoning in the United States in Berkeley in 1916. Why? Because he controlled the lots he was selling, but he was concerned about a prominent Negro dance hall moving into Elmhurst down the street. And so single family zoning wasn't created to zone an entire neighborhood so everybody could live there. It was designed to zone out certain uses. And it was always used in support, early on, in support of this racial vision. The Supreme Court in 1917 said you can't use government itself directly to limit where races can live, but through these contracts enforced by the courts that you could. In fact, the California Supreme Court in 1919 ruled that an African American could buy a home, one of these covenanted homes, but they couldn't live in it. They could be evicted because these covenants, were just matters of deed restriction. So this became the norm throughout the country. And it applied, realtors in existing neighborhoods started using the same approach by around 1910 as a way to sell homes. They went around, funded by Bank of America and other banks, and got property owners in white neighborhoods, largely white neighborhoods, to sign deed restrictions that went into effect when 3/4 of them were instituted. I looked at surveys of like Oakland's real estate board in 1927 responded to a statewide survey of real estate boards that talked about Negroes and Asiatics are the problem, and our covenant plan is most effective. We've restricted the coloreds everywhere, and all non-Caucasians in other areas, because it wasn't only African Americans who were excluded, Japanese, Chinese, Jews, Italians in many places. Eventually, over time, those people became deemed as white during World War II and after World War II, and started moving into these previously all Caucasian neighborhoods. But those who were left behind were African Americans. That's how you wound up with concentrated ghettos in every city in the country. By the end of the 19-teens, realtors had created this residential system, but it also become viewed as they became anti-salesmen, expected by local officials and by homeowners to enforce the system, which they had argued on the idea that a single minority moving into a white neighborhood would ruin that neighborhood. And so they needed a rationale. They hadn't had a rationale for creating this, so they created the rationale as a scientific axiom that minorities moving into white neighborhoods reduce property values. This wasn't true. It turned out, studies later showed, and for good reason. Anytime you restrict where people can live, they have to pay more. So in the 1920s and 30s, African Americans, typically confined to 5% of the areas of cities, had to spend 20 to 30% more for housing than white families. So segregation wasn't based on people who couldn't afford it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have needed this whole system. Finally, and this turned out to be a bogus argument, finally exposed after World War II, but the realtors had in the meantime basically been the key lobbyists and designers and creators of the Federal Housing Administration under the New Deal. It was 3 realtors in each city who did the drafts of the redlining maps that are now common knowledge, but at the time were secret and a way of limiting who could buy homes with federal insurance. After the Supreme Court in 1948, in Shelley versus Kramer, ruled that courts couldn't enforce these covenants, realtors in California first proposed a US constitutional amendment to overturn the 14th Amendment and legalize apartheid in America. It was the same year as apartheid in South Africa. And after a few months, advised by their lawyers, told you can do this more quietly through racial steering, through lying to buyers about, is that home available, through their code of ethics within the real estate board, which basically would destroy the business of anybody who dared to sell to a minority. You'd lose, you could no longer work in real estate. And through the newspapers like the Oakland Tribune, this is into the 1960s, if you put an ad, even if you were an owner willing to sell to anybody, they put your ad in a column marked restricted listings or unrestricted by what the Oakland Real Estate Board told the newspaper to do. This was such an intense system that in the entire decade of the 1950s in the Bay Area, out of 325,000 new single-family homes, 50 were sold without regard to race. In response, the activists, NACP and others, who had hoped that the Supreme Court decision would allow integration, and found it hadn't, they proposed fair housing laws. California, to end discrimination, California passed one in 1963 by a Berkeley assemblyman, Byron Rumford, who was a pharmacist, an assemblyman. And in response, the California Realtors Association put a measure on the ballot under California's great direct democracy system called Proposition 14 that said they would prohibit the state or any city from ever limiting the right to discriminate. But how could they argue for such an amendment in 1964? The height of the civil rights movement, with the federal civil rights law being passed with support of most Californians, a popular 2-term governor, Pat Brown, who had made fair housing his highest priority. And height of support for American liberalism, Lyndon Johnson's about to be reelected by the highest margin in American history. So instead, they argued for a new idea of American freedom, of individual freedom, of the absolute right of owners to decide who they could sell a property to, not just to the highest bidder, but could discriminate. There was no major politician, not Ronald Reagan, not Goldwater, would support them for fear of being seen as racist. So they invented this idea of colorblind freedom and of absolute rights for some, because absolute rights for anybody always means limiting the rights for others. And they said, we're in favor of equal rights for all because it's the equal right of owners of all races to discriminate. Am I anti-Negro? Spike Wilson, the Realtors chairman, asked. No, by God, I am their greatest champion. And they used this notion that discrimination was a matter of individual choice. And freedom of choice is what was blazoned on billboards throughout California. So it said to voters, to white Californians, you don't have to be in favor of discrimination or be prejudiced at all to support this proposition. You have to be in favor of defending American freedom. So they took Martin Luther King's idea of freedom as shared freedom of all Americans and said, no, freedom means your absolute private property, your individual right. An approach that later came to dominate what became that Ronald Reagan picked up in 1966 when he ran for governor. This proposition was ruled unconstitutional, but Reagan then used this argument to try and restore the law. And this became the basic proposition that's wound up polarizing the country on everything from abortion to gun rights to masks and vaccines, this notion of an absolute freedom, which means you ignore totally the freedom or the rights to buy a house or to rent a house or to choose where to live in favor of this notion of individual rights. So why don't I stop there? That's the big picture of this story and California's role in it, and take questions.
Thank you, Gene. Sandeepa, are you out there watching the chat? I know that it's interesting.
Yes, I am.
It's interesting as I look at the chat too. A couple of our members talk about the restrictions that were part of their deeds. One of our members who's Jewish says it was no Jews, or I think it was no Jews or blacks, but he moved in anyway. And no Jews or Negroes was how it was named. Yep. And also in Piedmont, the deed says no Asians. Sandeepa.
Yes, I'm here.
Do you have questions, or do I just open it up here?
Yeah, please open it up.
Okay. Does somebody want to ask a question there?
I have Fred asking, saying, thanks, Gene. A lot of cities in the world have affordable housing everywhere. Is zoning a big culprit to affordability?
Yeah, so let me just give a minute about the background of zoning. So zoning, as I said, the first single family zoning was an invention of the realtors. They were the key promoters of it. And they used their political influence. I mean, Duncan McDuffie's partner, C.C. Young, became Speaker of the California Assembly, Lieutenant Governor, and Governor. And McDuffie was the leader, and J.C. Nichols in Kansas City, of the efforts at American city planning and the establishment of zoning throughout the United States. So zoning was used, couldn't be used literally for racial segregation, but was used in support of it. And so you wound up having, starting in the 1920s, lots of new cities being created, new suburbs. Their real function was to control land use in order to limit who could live there. And this language of freedom in support of zoning is still very current. In 2015, Senators Rubio and other Republicans sponsored the law Trump used in trying to limit the fair housing law that now exists, which said every community should have the freedom to zone. So freedom now became applied at the group level. It sort of took the notion of freedom as an individual right and made it the right to a conforming community. That's how it linked together social conservatives and libertarians. It uses the language of libertarianism in order to support maintaining community tradition. So yes, zoning and single families, particularly cities that are entirely single family zoning, have been major limitations on what gets built. And you have a fragmented metropolis with fiscal zoning and hundreds of cities. The effort California legislature just passed this law that would allow a slight override to allow duplexes, which will have a very modest effect in reality. But it's sort of a first pushback against the idea of an absolute right to zone to control who else can live in a city.
Another question from Lorna Padilla. Now that you have presented the history, can you address how deed restrictions have evolved or not? In other words, has there been any successful litigation to overturn deed restrictions?
Okay, so in 1948, the US Supreme Court in Shelley versus Kramer ruled that courts could not enforce deed restrictions. Realtors tried all sorts of end runs around this. So for the next 20 years, they would write deed restrictions, like the city of, like in Daly City, Westlake, or Lakewood, were all built as FHA insured homes in the 1950s, and they were sold with these deed restrictions. And a minority might look at this and say, but I thought courts can't enforce it. Oh no, well, you're going to be in trouble. You can't get title insurance. They used this as a way to build all white suburbs throughout. Fair housing finally got passed in 1968 on the federal level in the wake of Martin Luther King's assassination, and cities, fires in 100 cities and troops guarding, machine gunners guarding the Capitol. But it's always been and so you can't have court enforcement of deed covenants. They're basically unenforceable. They sort of exist as historical memoir. But segregation remains in many ways because fair housing has always been weakened by the shadow of that California Proposition 14. It won 65% of the votes, 75% of the white vote, 82% of the white union vote. It split the long-term FDR's Democratic coalition. It created a new realignment, new messaging for America's political parties. So fair housing has always been very weak and has constantly been attacked as a straw man, by Nixon, by Reagan, by Donald Trump. So it's not been very effective in limiting, discrimination.
Anna Marie has a question. Have any real estate people in the Bay Area tried to correct the wrongs of their profession by championing home ownership for formerly excluded people?
Yeah, I think the realtors, after they fought bitterly against fair housing, and after it was passed, they eventually decided they had no choice. They actually wrote a newsletter to their members saying, the Negro at last is a free man, sort of vitiating all the arguments they had made before. And so on their letterhead, it says, California Association of Realtors committed to fair housing. So at a very public level, they're very much in support of fair housing. I think at an individual level, you wind up having lots of pressures on brokers. And it's not only brokers, appraisers. We see banks in the subprime crisis. Banks in this country still, with the same credit score, if you're African American, you're twice as likely to be turned down for a loan. If fair housing was effectively enforced by risking actually losing your licenses, if that was sort of the norm, that would probably change. But it's more the long-term impacts of creating these suburban zoning mechanisms, creating discriminatory pressures, are still there. It would have taken strong government action to overcome the legacy of all these institutional forces realtors created over those 70 years. And it's precisely that strong government action that this conservative idea of freedom and its popular support has prevented.
Gene,
Debo,
it's time we got to move. I got to let you go here too. Gene, we really want to thank you for being with us today.
Okay, thank you. All right.
This year, we're highlighting the new Rotary area focus, the environment. So in your honor, we're making a donation to the Environmental Sustainability Rotary Action Group, SRAG, towards their focus on biodiversity, sustainable living, pollution, the climate, food systems, and a circular economy. Thank you for being a part of our Civic Thursday meeting. And I don't know if anybody's ever approached you about considering Rotary. We'd sure love to offer that, or if you're in San Francisco, we'd love to refer you to our sister club in San Francisco too. But it's been so good to have you here today, and we thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Past president, oh, I'm sorry, Mike Mowery. Could you give us our thought for the day, please?
There we go. President Dudley, I'd be happy to. Actually, apropos to Gene Slater's great presentation we just had, I'd like to add a historic quote from Martin Luther King Jr. that goes back to when he's kind of shifted the civil rights movement from desegregation in the South to housing inequality in the North and beyond. In 1966, he started the Chicago open housing movement, which historians say laid the groundwork for the 1968 Fair Housing Act that Gene Slater mentioned. In a speech at Chicago Soldier Field, King said, "We are tired of living in rat-infested slums. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to open the doors of opportunity to all of God's children." That's a goal that, unfortunately, as Mr. Slater has described, we're still fighting for today.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Sandeep or Jack, could you put up our Rotary Vision statement so that we can? Are we up there? There we go. Would you please say the Rotary Vision statement together with me? Together, we see a world where people unite and take action to create lasting change across the globe, in our communities and in ourselves, which also seems very apropos to today's meeting. Past president and past district governor, Ed Jelen. I see you're coming in once again on Jelen TV, Channel 6. Do we have any visiting Rotarians or guests today?
Yeah, President Dudley, I am saddened to say that no visiting Rotarians or guests checked in. So my pad remains blank. But if there are any guests or visiting Rotarians out there who didn't check in, love to have you at our club, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Ed. You know, when we've been meeting in the ballroom, we've been really fortunate to not so many visiting Rotarians, but we've sure had a lot of guests come. So we'll be back in the ballroom next week for the rest of October and even through November. I think we have every meeting in the ballroom until Thanksgiving. So please bring a guest. Let's see here. What's next? I need to call to our attention that longtime member Marion Sims died last week. Marion was a 3-sport athlete at McClymonds High. He played football, basketball, and baseball. He helped Bill Russell, who was 3 years younger, progress in basketball. He was a 3-sport star at Santa Rosa Junior College and in their Athletic Hall of Fame. He served in the Air Force in the early 50s in Germany and was appointed by Claire Booth Luce, the US ambassador, to be a sports ambassador. He traveled throughout Europe in conducting sports clinics, and he was a 29-year member of Rotary. And as most of you know, he served as the executive director of the Oakland Boys and Girls Club for 27 years, from 1965 to 1992. We just take a moment to remember him. Thank you. Jack, do you have that next screen to put up for me? Or do you want me to share it?
You can go ahead and share, President Dudley.
Okay, let's see if I can do this here quickly. Oh, gosh. You know, with this thing, I don't know how to share full screen. Can't get to it. Anyway, what's before you, and I have to say on my screen, because I'm sharing screen, there's a bunch of stuff blocking my view selection to give you a full screen. So I hope you can follow me here for a moment. So over the next few months and starting today, we're going to, today October, we're calling Paul Harris Month. November will be the Rotary Foundation Month. But I wanted to share with you a little bit of the overview of what our charitable campaigns are. People often find it confusing, even people that know Rotary well. It's always a good reminder. And we also want to be open about, we do have campaigns every year, and we don't want them to be surprises that, oh, it seemed just yesterday you were asking for money. I'd like to explain just for a minute or two, and this is a very snapshot overview, but sort of a reminder, and I'll be going over it again several times this year, just so that we're clear of some of the parts of Rotary. First of all, over the next few months, October, as I said, we're calling Paul Harris Month. We'll be recognizing those people that have contributed to the Rotary Foundation or receiving awards, which is going to follow this in a moment. Also, during October, some of our larger donors will be receiving calls to inquire about their gifts for both the Rotary Foundation and Oakland Rotary Endowment. November is the month that all of the Rotary world focuses on the Rotary Foundation, and I'll say what that is in a moment. December is our own club's Feed the Hungry campaign. One meeting December, and very quickly here, it will be on December 9th. We do a fundraiser for local groups that feed the hungry, who distribute food. And last year, I think we raised about $17,000 or $20,000 in the club, and Steve Nichols' company at that time, before he retired, matched that grant. So we raised some $40,000 to feed the hungry. Then we skip for a couple months, and in March, we begin the Oakland Rotary Endowment campaign, and we end in April with our gala celebration. Again, just kind of to remind you, there are really four things you have to know about Rotary. One is Rotary Club of Oakland. The other is our own endowment, Oakland Rotary Endowment. The third is Rotary International Organization and its foundation, the Rotary Foundation. Because we are the club is a nonprofit organization, but it is not a charitable foundation. So the dues that we charge every year, they're $780. They're billed in June and December. Those go towards the salaries, primarily Jesse and our bookkeeper, goes towards the rent in the California ballroom. And out of that, we also pay Rotary International dues, which include the magazine and our dues to our district. Our charitable arm that funds all of our charitable grants and programs is called the Oakland Rotary Endowment, or ORE. We raise money through elective contributions. Those are your choice of how much to contribute. Although when you joined, you did make a pledge to give to something to ORE and to Rotary Foundation every year. We do raise, under ORE, we raise the money, as I said, for Feed the Hungry. We have the campaign. The campaign, the money you give to the campaign is split 25 and 75. 25% goes to the year's projects and grants immediately following. In other words, the gala from the campaign from last year, 25% goes towards this year, and 75% goes into our permanent endowment. We do a gala, which is a major fundraiser for us, and those bell ringers you hear about every week. All that money goes to the Oakland Rotary Endowment, which funds all of the charitable work we do in and around Oakland, and also our international committee. Rotary International, RI, we collect district, we feed that by giving district dues. Again, that's like Rotary Club of Oakland. It's a nonprofit, but not a charitable foundation. And then there is the Rotary Foundation, or TRF. Again, elective contributions, the TRF campaign, Polio Plus, and all these Paul Harris contributions. And again, that supports charitable grants and programs worldwide for Rotary International. I hope that was a brief and somewhat succinct. It's complicated. There's more to it than that, but I hope that gives you a little bit of an overview of this year and what we do in Rotary. I'm going to stop share, and I'm going to turn this over to Leanne Alameda, who is the president of the Oakland Rotary Endowment, but also today is representing the Rotary Foundation. And she is the co-chair along with Joe Garalka of the foundation. Leanne?
Everyone. Thank you, President Lee. As he mentioned, October is the Paul Harris Award Month, and today we are honoring Paul Harris Fellow awardees. Named after Rotary's founder, Paul Harris, these awards are a recognition of Rotarians who commit to peace and a better life for people around the world. A Paul Harris Fellow is presented to members making an accumulated contribution of $1,000 to the Rotary Foundation, and each additional $1,000 thereafter is recognized, which is the case with our awardees today. A Paul Harris Major Donor Award recognizes. Take this moment to recognize their dedication to service above self. And I now turn it back to President Dudley to present the awards.
I know Leanne has had a little bit of bandwidth issues, but we heard almost everything there, Leanne.
Oh, no. I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. You're wonderful. Everything. But what just got cut off at the end is that a major donor is an accumulated gift of $10,000. Today and over the next few weeks, we're going to be honoring people that are getting these awards. I'll start with Mona Hall, who is a Paul Harris Fellow +1, which means she's given accumulation of endowment. And then I'm going to go to Steve Nichols, who is a Paul Harris +5, which is, I think, $5,000. Is that right? Foundation?
6,000.
6,000. Okay, those are the pluses. I was right on one. And also Garrett Daly, I think, here is with us here today. Garrett, good to see you. Don't get to see you very often. It's wonderful to have you. And Garrett is a Paul Harris +5. And then Linda Chu is with us today. He's a Paul Harris +7. And Gail Alkema, who is recognized as a major donor today. And I know one or two of you are going to say something today. I know Linda was going to. Why don't we start with you?
Okay, thank you. Well, President Dudley and Rotarians, I am happy to support the Rotary Foundation. Where else can my undesignated gift be used by Rotary International for its work, such as to help eradicate polio, support literacy, or sustain agricultural practices? And then several years later, that gift, most of it, comes back locally to be used as a matching part for a global grant, which, together with matching funds from Rotary International and funds from other clubs in the world, will be used once again for projects that our Carl Stuckey World Community Service Committee has identified and sponsored. That's what I call philanthropy, as well as a great investment. I'm happy to participate. Thanks.
Thank you. I believe Gail was, you had something there today?
Yes, thank you. I too am very pleased to be a contributor to a Rotary International Foundation. As Linda said, it's a terrific investment. It just keeps giving and multiplying. And I love the way that we say the vision each time, because the impact and the change are just remarkable. Not only for our eye projects that they have, but through this global grant process, our local community, our local committee of World Community Service is able to develop global grants that have an unbelievable impact because of the compounding of the money. So whether it's building wells or providing food or addressing national disasters, everyone in our club has the opportunity to participate in that committee and determine where those funds go. So it's, again, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. I have an extra minute or two here, and I have to say I knew Linda and Gail were there. I didn't know if Steve or Garrett or Mona, but if one of you or two of you would like to say a word, you are just welcome. And you don't have to.
Well, actually, can I volunteer, President Dudley?
Please, Garrett.
Like 30 years ago or so, Carl Stuckey identified a need in San Salvador. There were 2 vacant hospitals there because of the Civil War, were intended as pediatric hospitals, but could not be operational. And Carl, through his tenacious will, arranged to accumulate used and surplus medical equipment and supplies. And then I worked with him, and we got a $50,000 grant from Rotary International to fund the project. And to think of the difference that one project made in the lives of so many kids, well, that's what's been spurring me on for 30 some years.
Thank you. And I know our World Community Service in general has about 10 global grant projects going on, making good use of our Rotary Foundation funds that we give them and funds that come back to us. Mona or Steve? Anything? Okay. I won't put you on the spot, but thank you, everybody, and congratulations, and we really appreciate your gifts. Carrie Hamill, are you out there?
I am.
You started started working with Laney College this week with Karen and putting together a project. Could you tell us a little bit about what your first week was like?
Yes, President Dudley. We had an excellent service gathering at Laney College on Tuesday. You know, the campus has been a bit of a ghost town during the pandemic, but it opened up to 30% of the students in September. Those are the students who can only attend classes and can't work remotely. So our Rotary has a history of distributing food on the Laney campus, and we were back in business on Tuesday. We set up the liveliest and chattiest and most efficient assembly line in history at the center of campus, and we were outside for safety reasons. We broke down vats of food that were delivered by the Alameda County Food Bank, and on our assembly line, we created 200 grab and go food bags for students and athletes to take home. The effort will continue and hopefully expand as more students return to campus. This is a really fun way to serve. Every Tuesday, we're going to be there from 1 to 3:30. You must sign up in advance on the Rotary calendar because certain COVID protocols must be observed. And just to remind people, 86% of Laney students receive some sort of financial aid. And almost 70% when surveyed say they face food insecurity regularly in their lives. So we'd love to see you next Tuesday, 1 to 3:30. And thank you to Karen, particularly for leading this effort for Rotary for years.
Thank you very much, Carrie. That's a great project. I'm really glad we were able to get it started again. Renia Webb, are you out there?
Yes, sir, I am. How are you all?
Good. You proposed a new project to Community Service Committee just yesterday, and they accepted it. And you want to tell us about it? It's going to be exciting.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. And excuse me, I'm literally running from one meeting, which is why I'm in my car. Thank you, President Dudley, for giving me this space, as well as the Community Service Committee and David Kittner. Our club was asked to participate in a beautiful coat drive collective, which is hosted by the We Lead Our Own organization, which is a local-based organization that introduces kids to tennis, to crew, to civic leadership, community engagement, service projects. I mean, they're just doing so much good in our communities for underserved, underprivileged children. This is their 4th year. They're doing their annual coat drive. The first year it started off, they collected 50 coats. The second year, 125. She said last year they collected over 300 coats. This year they're hoping to collect 500, working with different nonprofit organizations around the city and Bay Area. Coats for men, women, children, boys and girls. And what we're asking is our next meetings that we have in October, November, and the beginning of December is that you all will bring a gently used coat or either purchase a nice new coat for a young kid or a parent in need. We'll go ahead and set up the collection barrels at every meeting. And we just ask that you all just drop a coat off and just to help support these children and their families. And I just think this is a beautiful way of us to give to service and also to just get connected into the community. And again, the organization is called We Lead Our Own. And yeah, just very thankful for the Community Service Committee for allowing our club to partner with them and just uplift our community. And this winter is supposed to be colder because of global warming. So our families and children will definitely need these coats. And not just coats, scarves, hats, gloves, anything in that vein that you're able to donate in the next week, the next few months. Like I said, we'll be setting up a barrel at the entrance of the club room. And when you all come in, please come and drop off an item for these families in need. Thank you so much.
So we'll have a collection container really up until mid-December at all of the meetings when we're at the ballroom. And whether it's coats or gloves or a scarf, lightly used, or if you want to purchase something and put it in there, it'll be really appreciated and put to good use. David Kittner, are you out there? I told him I would make the announcement if he wasn't here today, so. I'm not hearing David. So what it is you'll hear more about it in the next couple of weeks, but we want to say hold the date of Saturday, October 23rd. It's our next service, Community Service Committee Service Day, and we will be volunteering at St. Vincent de Paul on San Pablo Avenue in Oakland. So please mark that calendar. And I didn't check before I said this, but there will be a sign up on the website. It'll be on the club calendar on the website, and please sign up for that.
It's there.
It's there. Jesse says it's there, so you can go ahead and do that. So the next thing I had was we were going to update you on Cocktails with the President this evening, and Dudley decided to stop drinking, so we're not going to do it. So we had a little glitch, and we apologize for that, but we had to cancel Cocktails with the President this evening, and it was going to piggyback with membership. So we had encouraged you to bring a member to that. And we will get back to you. We're going to try to coordinate both the membership committee and entertainment committee, and we're trying to not have everything back to back right now, but we had a little glitch. Apologize for that. You can go home and just share the evening with your loved ones, and your spouse or your family and your pets. I'll go off script here a minute. I had a cat emergency yesterday. We had a cat medication, and one of them broke into a cabinet and ate all of them. And so we have 4 cats, and we didn't know which cat ate all of the medication. And we were faced with taking 4 cats to the vet. Turns out there is a poison control for pets. We called them and they put us to ease, and we didn't have to take them in. And we're just hoping that they all turn out okay. Okay, enough of that. Sean Callum, would you tease our speaker for next week?
Absolutely, President Dudley. So everyone, thank you for coming today. And if you thought today's speaker was interesting and informative, you've got to come back for round 2 next week. Have you ever wondered, why is it so difficult to build more affordable housing in California? Or have you ever thought about what can we do to help facilitate more affordable housing? Then come back next week and see our speaker, who is Linda Mandolini, the president of Eden Housing, one of the most preeminent affordable housing developers here in California. And she's also an Oakland resident and someone who has thought about joining Rotary. So that is our speaker for next week.
Thank you, Sean. So,
We have a lot of bell ringers.
Okay, just give me a minute. I'm just going to give us a little brief overview this coming week, and then we'll get to bell rings. I'm glad to hear there's a bunch. So this upcoming Monday, our Business Development Committee is meeting at 5:45. Entertainment. There we go. Our Entertainment Committee meeting is at 5 o'clock on Tuesday. Membership Committee is meeting at 6. Let's see, Hope Committee is meeting at 12 o'clock on Wednesday, and the Speakers Committee meeting is at 5:30 on Wednesday. I know all of these committees would be glad to have new people attend. Go check it out. See if it's a place for you. And next Thursday, as I said, the club will be meeting in the ballroom, and we'll be there every day throughout October and November. Excuse me, until Thanksgiving. One thing about we've decided, and I know it's confusing, but we've decided that we're not going to do pre-ordered food for October. We will do the receptions that we've had. So there will be some cheese and crackers, and we'll make sure there's chocolate chip cookies for everybody. So you're welcome to come snack on that. You're welcome to bring a sandwich. There's 3 cafes nearby. You're welcome to bring your own food. But it's clunky. And we're trying out things, but we do want you to come to the ballroom. Okay, Sandeepa.
So we have a lot of bell ringers, President Dudley. So starting with Robert Kidd rings the bell for Marion Sims.
Okay, we'll take just a moment between them.
Wise Allen rings the bell for Marion Sims. Alex Paulson rings the bell for Marion Sims. Seth Butner rings the bell for Marion Sims.
Are we muted?
Yeah.
I've got a question for you.
Sure.
This says Friday.
Just
Premium
one moment.
box seats.
I'm going to, there we go. Okay, go ahead.
Lorna Padilla rings the bell for Marion Sims. Stephanie Kazanza rings the bell for Marion Sims. Joe Gorelka rings the bell for Marion Sims. David Stein rings the bell for Marion Sims. I think I got everyone.
Okay, you can add me to that list too, Sandeepa.
El Presidente Dudley rings the bell for Marion Sims.
Marion Sims was such a treasure to our community and to the Boys and Girls Club and to our to our club as well. I really appreciate everybody.
Lorna
Thank you.
Padilla rings the bell for Karen Friedman.
Okay,
And Fred Morse rings the bell for Jean Slater.
okay,
We have Joe Goralka ringing the bell for all Paul Harris Fellow honored today. Mike Malone rings the bell for Marion in honor. He was so instrumental in my Hope Committee involvement, he says.
yeah. We didn't mention his involvement with Hope Committee from the beginning. He was just instrumental to that committee.
I think I now got everyone.
Okay, and save some of those bell ringers. I think next week we're doing a reintroduction for Elita Scola, and for all of us that love Elita, bring $100 in your pocket.
So what is this whole thing about ringing bell, President Dudley?
Ringing the bell, my goodness, it's $100 contribution, voluntary contribution to the Oakland Rotary Endowment. And it goes directly to, if you do it before December, it goes directly to Mary Jiang's year. And if you wait until January 1st, it goes to an unknown person, whoever will be our president-elect nominee. So anyway.
I missed Debor Sarkar. How could I miss that?
Oh, Debo, thank you.
Debor rings the bell for Marion as well.
Great. Okay, I hope we got everybody there. So thank you, everybody who rang the bell today. Thank you, Robert Kidd, for introducing our speaker, and Jean Slater. That was a fascinating and somewhat troubling history of our, in fact, not just somewhat troubling, it's a difficult part of the history of America that we still live with. So thank you, Jean. Thank you, Mike, for our thought for the day. Ed Jelen, past president, past district governor Ed Jelen. I just went to a district meeting last night where we always have to say past district governor. Leanne, thank you so much for introducing our Paul Harris Awards, and we'll see you again next week for that. To all the Paul Harris recipients, Carrie, thanks for telling us about the food pantry, and people sign up for that, please, and bring a coat next week. Renea, thank you. And Sean, thanks for teasing our speaker for next week. Please come back and hear her. So this meeting of the Rotary Club of Oakland is adjourned. Good. Are we still on a few people? David, Kirsten, did you get my note that we're meeting?